LeBron James also made some interesting comments, though, and this was overall a great piece from The Athletic. And not only was he talking about his son wanting to play with his son, he was also giving high praise to the Oklahoma City Thunder GM Sam Presti, calling him the MVP. Now, obviously, this report comes on the heels of a lot of information being leaked out of Clutch's camp and through a bunch of NBA sources that the relationship had kind of between the Lakers and Clutch Sports had kind of reached a boiling point, and they were really frustrated with Rob Pelinka because of his refusal to make a Russell Westbrook and John Wall trade. Now, obviously, in order to have completed that trade, the likelihood is that the Lakers would have needed to have included that 2027 first round pick, which Rob Pelinka was reluctant to do. And for me, I would have been very indifferent about the trade. I was already indifferent about the trade going into it, even when they threw it out hypothetically. I wouldn't have loved it. I wouldn't have hated it. It's one of those things where you kind of just react to it and your thoughts kind of develop your thoughts once you see it happen. So I, I definitely would acknowledge that a move needed to be made. There's no question around that. There's no dancing around that. So, from the perspective of should there have been disappointment in the LeBron camp that nothing was done? Yes. There's no question about that. The Lakers are 27 and 31. They're ninth in the Western Conference. They're a struggling team right now in the NBA. Nothing's going right. Anthony Davis now badly turned his ankle. He's out at least a month. It looked brutal. It looked awful. It was cringeworthy to see that ankle sprain. So the fact that it was not even worse than that is a blessing. But this is kind of the LeBron story because everywhere he goes, it's a 4-year process. He ends up exhausting all of the resources that that franchise has wherever he is. That franchise mortgages their future to cater to LeBron in the present. He wins them a title, and then he leaves and he flees to go somewhere else. It's a 4-year process. Year one, he arrives midway through the season. He's trying to trade a bunch of the young pieces to acquire old vets. It doesn't mesh together perfectly in the first year, but they still reach the postseason. Year two, they win the title, which we've seen the last 3 locations he's been: Miami, Cleveland, Lakers. He always wins a title in year two. He has the perfect blend, the perfect harmony. The cohesiveness is there of his teammates. Year three, we start to see some breakdowns. Some of the old veterans, they can't bring back everyone. They try to re-sign all of those key vets in the offseason. They reach the postseason, and they kind of flame out. And then by year 4, the team is depleted. They're normally plagued by injuries. LeBron has to carry the load by himself, and they come up a little bit short. And then he shrewdly decides to take his talents elsewhere and seek out a new location and a new destination. That's kind of the sequence of events with LeBron over the course of his career. So the downside is by the time you reach the 4th year, the entire roster is depleted. You don't have any future capital to work with, no future draft picks. You have no current young players on the roster. So the future is a bit bleak. And you also don't have any trade assets to make moves to acquire other guys. So that's kind of the problem with the LeBron method. Now it works, and teams are willing to do it because if you are in an NBA, if you are in the midst of an NBA title drought, well, this is a way to answer that and to collect a title. Is you appeal to LeBron, you appeal to your superstar. So obviously, this is a blatant criticism of Rob Pelinka. There's no sugarcoating that. Yes, it was quasi passive aggressive. This is pretty direct from LeBron and from Clutch Sports that they are frustrated with Rob Pelinka. And I think that there is a fine line between catering to your superstar and also making the best serving the best interests of the organization you're working for. Those are two very different things, and you have to delineate between the two. That's the reality. You have to decipher between the two. And it's interesting to me because as I was listening to these quotes and I was reading these quotes that LeBron said about he was complimenting Sam Presti for his GMing skills and specifically for his ability to identify talent and his draft acumen, how he drafted KD, how he drafted Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Reggie Jackson, Serge Ibaka, Josh Giddey, Jeff Green, but most recently Josh Giddey, who has proven to be a really standout player, an up and coming player in the NBA. The irony is the way that LeBron operates and the way that he wants his GMs to operate don't coexist. There isn't a natural marriage between the two. In fact, they are the antitheses of one another. Because for a GM to draft a player, you have to first of all have picks and you have to provide them opportunities to grow. LeBron doesn't provide safe havens for recent draft picks. He's trying to ship them out. He wants proven guys. So the LeBron method doesn't allow for GMs to showcase their drafting skills. Because once they draft a player, the player is gone. We've actually seen that the track record of the Lakers and their drafting skills is actually fairly good. It's actually quite high. D'Angelo Russell, Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Julius Randle, Jordan Clarkson, now THT. Now, no one's saying that those guys are world beaters, that they're going to be a top 10 player of all time or a top 10 player in the NBA, but a lot of those guys have been all-stars. A lot of those guys have been vital contributors and quality NBA players, but they needed opportunities to flourish and grow, and the Lakers couldn't provide that primarily because of LeBron's arrival. Now, no one's mad about it because it led to a title, but that's the reality of the situation. And so I understand that LeBron is frustrated. And to be honest, Rob Pelinka has to wear the brunt of this because ultimately, even though LeBron wields a lot of power within that organization, the buck stops with Rob Pelinka. And he's ultimately the one that has to execute the trade. And even though ultimately he catered to LeBron, he's got to wear the brunt of that. Now, I'm not going to absolve LeBron either because Pelinka had a trade for Buddy Hield in place that would have retained a little bit more of their depth. And instead, LeBron wanted to pivot and sign Westbrook. So now he's got to live with the fact that we're dealing with this situation. And now the Lakers are hamstrung. That falls on LeBron as well. But I just think that it was already unrealistic at this point in the year to really be able to execute a major trade like that. So I understand LeBron's camp is frustrated, and it's only been exacerbated by Anthony Davis's injury. That's true. And I understand LeBron's trying to paint Rob Pelinka as like this bad guy. I don't know if it's entirely justified, but both of those guys shouldn't be absolved of blame and of backlash coming back their way. That's the reality of the situation.